Welcome to Season 6 of the India Energy Hour podcast. This podcast explores the most pressing hurdles and promising opportunities of India's energy transition through an in-depth discussion on policies, financial markets, social movements, and science. Your hosts for this episode are Shreya J., Delhi-based energy and climate journalist, and Dr. Sandeep Pai, energy transition researcher and author. The show is produced by 101 Reporters, a pan-India network of grassroots reporters that produces original stories from rural India. If you like our podcast, please rate us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the platform where you listen to our podcast. Your support will help us reach a larger audience. India is facing more frequent and intense heat waves. The challenge is not just rising temperatures. Cities, infrastructure, and public systems must also adapt. In the second part of the Heat series, we hosted Dr. Indu K. Murthy, Sector Head, Climate, Environment, and Sustainability at CSTEP. She explained how extreme heat is reshaping urban life, straining energy systems, and exposing inequalities in access to cooling and resilient infrastructure. She also highlighted the need for better urban planning, climate-responsive buildings, localized data, and stronger coordination across energy, water, and public health systems.
So, Dr. Murthy, welcome to the India Energy Hour. I am very excited to talk to you today, and I've been following your work for a while, so it's really a pleasure to have you on the podcast and just learn about your work and some really interesting topic that you cover in your work. So, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thanks for having me on the India Energy Hour. You did mention when we were chatting before we started actually this recording, that you have a lot of PhDs who kind of follow the podcast. I'm also one of them. So, it's very interesting conversations that you cover. So it's been wonderful, and I've also been kind of following the work, that happens in this particular space. So it's my pleasure to be here on this podcast.
Amazing. Thank you. So, let's just start by kind of understanding your story, your journey. Everybody has a very interesting journey. I love this, my favorite part of the podcast, more than the topic itself.
All
So,
right.
let's kind of hear about, where are you from? What did you study? How did you get into the
Right.
climate space and so on?
Yeah. Yeah. While, a lot of the podcasts I've heard on your shows are very interesting journeys, I don't personally think mine is super exciting, but yes, maybe somebody listening might find it quite exciting. So I grew up in a very small town in Tamil Nadu. My father was with the state electricity board. So obviously, and I was kind of growing up in substations, which is away from the main cities in small towns, etc. Although I do kind of primarily belong to Karnataka. So growing up years were in small towns where, power cuts, heat were something that I kind of grew up with. But although being in substations, I was in some ways, I had the luxury of not having too many power cuts because, that's where the supply goes from. So, that was there. But I did kind of see these power shutdowns, etc. And of course, growing in hot Tamil Nadu, North Arcot district, heat was something, that was like summers being very hot was quite common for me. And then, of course, growing close to nature, that's kind of kept my interest going on that. So, which is why I ended up actually doing my graduation in botany. So this was in Chennai, of course. And from there on, I went on to do my master's in Baroda, MS University Baroda, where I specialized in forestry and environment. At that point in time, I think that was the only university which was offering that kind of a specialization, other than one of these schools, private schools or private bodies that were offering something on forestry and environment based out of Delhi. So that kind of, was super exciting for me to be, being away from home and then again working on a topic that's close to my heart. So once I finished that, I actually came back to Bangalore because this being our home state and with, my parents wanting to come back to the home state with my father retiring and so on, I actually kind of walked into IASC one fine June afternoon to kind of see opportunities that could be there. It was a cold call, interestingly. But then I did walk into one of these labs in the Center for Ecological Sciences at the Indian Institute of Science. And there, I went and met a professor who was working on aspects of forestry, Professor Ravindranath. I think there started my journey, truly speaking, in the area of, climate, biodiversity, community forestry, and so on and so forth. My early days of work actually is quite interesting because I actually started looking at joint forest management and community forestry. For a lot of people, this might not be a very familiar topic today, but in the 90s, this was something everybody was talking about, everybody was discussing. And we had the luxury of actually running what is called as an ecological and economics research network. So the Indian Institute of Science and my lab particular group was actually the anchor institution. So there, the beauty of it was that this network had people from academia, from non-governmental organizations, and other think tanks also. So basically, all of them came together. The idea was to kind of understand what was being implemented. The formal structured joint forest management, which was supported by the government, and other was these community forestry initiatives where people and communities had come together for whatever their reasons. In some place, it was dearth of firewood for pyres that led them to kind of, start, protecting forests. In some other place, it was lack of fodder for grazing. And then they came up with their own ways of managing these systems. So with a common framework, all these research groups were trying to understand across India what's happening with these. That was my first kind of entry into understanding the social perspective of forestry. While I had studied forestry, I kind of was introduced into the very, very, very tangible and very strong link between people and forestry there. So that was very interesting. And with the end of, that happened for about 3 to 5 years or so. It was a very long project, 2, 3 phases, where we were looking at the economics of joint forest management. We were also looking at the ecological impacts of, the community forestry and joint forest management initiatives, and so on and so forth. So it gave me kind of, as I said, my understanding of the strong linkage between people and forestry kind of, I think the foundational thinking actually was seeded there. And then this entire gamut of different kinds of people working on various aspects of forestry was also something, I was introduced to. And then subsequently, that was the time when I think the whole world was kind of waking up and making a lot of hue and cry regarding climate change. And there were also these clean development mechanism rules, etc., that were being talked about. And it so happened that my professor was an IPCC author. And so he was kind of working very closely with a lot of these, global scientists who are looking at these various aspects of climate change. And one of the early projects was actually looking at impact of climate change on and its implications on forest product flow. So again, it was an offshoot of what I was looking at and what I had studied, but more from a people perspective, from the lives and livelihood perspective that we were trying to work on. So that again led me into the villages and rural areas of Uttara Kannada district. That's the North Kannada district in Karnataka. This is basically in the Western Ghats. So obviously very forest rich area and a lot of non-timber forest products, which people kind of depend on largely for subsistence, but in some cases they're also marketed, and it's local economy out there. While there are also a lot of produce which are also kind of gathered by the forest departments, and it kind of contributes to the state economy as well. So, but that was a very interesting study, and we were trying to trace what were the changes over time, how has it changed, and also trying to understand the causality of these changes that have happened because of what is there. And people were also attributing it to one, of course, biodiversity loss. Development was something that people were talking about, but I thought people were also beginning to recognize some changes in rainfall patterns and so on and so forth, incidents of pests in some cases, and things like that. So in a way, I went in to understand forest product flow, but I also kind of got an insight into the climate aspect, or the climate variability aspect of the science aspect of what's actually impacting these. And that kind of deepened my interest in this particular space. So then I think subsequently, all the projects that I were looking at, while it started with forestry, I kind of broadened it to look at the state of environment. Again, we were trying to look at state of environment in village ecosystems and trying to map them again with the people and trying to understand, what is happening with the climate and how it's impacting. So in a nutshell, I think a lot of these happened where it was at the conjunction of people and natural resources. So that was the main thinking that was embedded in a lot of the work that I did. And then subsequently, of course, I also had the opportunity of developing a clean development mechanism forestry project for the Himachal Pradesh. And that also kind of gave me a lot of understanding with respect to the global thinking about, carbon trading and so on and so forth. So it was very interesting, of course. And we did obviously, develop a successful project. When I say successful, because it was registered and people have actually got some carbon money that flowed in as well over years. So various aspects of climate change was something that I kept doing. Interestingly, I also worked on the climate mitigation, land-based mitigation aspects, where I was trying to look at, how do you kind of utilize land for biodiversity conservation, but also, end up try to see how do you enhance carbon sequestration as well. So that was another aspect. And of course, the adaptation and resilience, of course, became the central component of a lot of the work that I was doing post a decade or more, which is what I'm focusing on largely here at CSTEP. So I spent about 2 decades at Indian Institute of Science. And then there was a point in time when I felt that a lot of academic work, but interestingly, the lab that I was associated in also was always kind of focusing on the intersection of society and whatever work we are doing, whether it's biodiversity conservation or climate. So probably I think the seed was there. It was seeded there, this thinking. But then I think after 2 decades, I decided that, I wanted to kind of move into another space where the policy and the societal angle became heavier than the academic and research angle. While research would happen, it should feed into something bigger. So which is where I moved into CSTEP, the Center for Study of Science, Technology and Policy, which is a not-for-profit policy think tank. And I moved in there and we started work on climate adaptation and resilience, trying to kind of first and foremost see how climate is changing, looking at district level changes in climate across all the districts of India, and then coming up with a set of reports and using that information to resilience buildings, etc. So those were the pieces of work which were foundational at CSTEP, which kind of helped us to build all the various pieces of work that we are doing today with respect to climate adaptation and resilience.
Wow, what a long journey and association with climate. And I really appreciate that you've seen various aspects, not just kind of one topic. Um, I'm excited to dive into the topic. It's there's a lot to cover here, but let's just start by 101 of this. Like, why should we care about heat?
Yeah,
Especially in a country like India. I think there is an obvious answer, but let's hear from you.
right, right.
And why? how is it linked to future infrastructure or current infrastructure? So let's just start with the
Yeah,
problem statement, why it matters.
absolutely. While India is a tropical country and heat isn't something new to the tropics, I think in much of India, we've all grown up with hot summers. But then what's actually changing is the magnitude of heat that we are experiencing, which is, when traditionally we are used to kind of, where you were used to 32 or 33 degrees centigrade, what you're experiencing today is 34. I mean, I'm sitting in Bangalore today, this year, it's extremely hot. And secondly, while typically you would associate heat with, March, April, May, there are many parts of India which have started experiencing heat much earlier. So, one is the timing of the onset of heat itself or the heat events is kind of changing. And secondly, the frequency with which these increased, peaking or, shooting of temperatures is happening, it's becoming much more frequent, which is a huge cause of concern because uh, our bodies, as well as the infrastructure that we've built to support our life and lifestyles, have been kind of built with what traditionally systems have experienced. So, which is where I think seeing this rising heat and more frequent extreme temperature events is potentially why we are forced to fundamentally rethink, how we should be a designing or even retrofitting some of the things that we've done in many of the places, particularly the large cities where infrastructure have already been built. And also, I think one of the fundamental things is that urban infrastructure is meant to improve quality of life ultimately, right? So that is the intent behind this. But when you're looking at a warming climate, this very infrastructure, which is supposed to, support a good quality of life, is actually trapping more and more heat, which means it's causing thermal discomfort. More heat within built environment is not a great feeling. And secondly, all the concrete surfaces or buildings and roads, they're all absorbing heat during the day, and typically they release it at night. But what's happening today is that many of these cities, which with these large infrastructure, they're not cooling down enough when people could when need it the most. So basically, the difference between your night temperature and the day temperature is shrinking, which means to say the infrastructure is not cooling enough, and so is the body of humans or other life which are kind of residing is not cooling enough. So this prolonged exposure basically is increasing risk and also reducing productivity. Obviously, more heat, people are not able to sleep. The other is also about this infrastructure planning. Why we are thinking about refining it or evolving it is because it's not just about buildings anymore, or but it's about building differently. It could be with the design, because there are enough passive designs in place. I think the beauty of it is, if you talk to architects and planners, they will tell us that India has had multiple building designs which are suited to different agroclimatic zones, different climates that are there even within a country like India. But then in the name of development, what we've done is, every city we go, whether it is rural or urban, we have the same housing structure, which potentially is concrete. And these are not really suited. So obviously, we will need to kind of maybe go back to some of these traditional designs, which is basically promoting or allowing for airflow between these structures. In very simple terms, or maybe we need to think about protecting and restoring blue green spaces, whether it is lakes in a city like Bangalore or urban forests that are being promoted across cities. And also, of course, use of reflective materials that could be potentially used. Now, do we have some kind of mandate within the planning process? Then yes, frameworks like there's something called Econivas Samhita, which is the building codes for residential structures, which is actually nudging construction in this direction. But we also should recognize that design alone won't solve the problem because access to cooling becomes important. Now, the question is how many people can afford the kind of structures that we are talking about, how many people can actually afford cooling as well. So I think that also becomes a very important aspect of looking at infrastructure in the context of heat itself. Cities do need shaded public spaces. They need drinking water and cooling shelters as well. I think Chennai, for instance, is a classic case where it is expanding cooling shelters for gig workers. It's been in the news of late, and they're kind of creating this in familiar places like community halls and clinics, which is a great step in the right direction. And also, I think potentially, I think the problem is we always think about solutions as new structures that need to be created, new assets that need to be created. But I think what we should also think about is how do we make use of existing assets? For instance, you have these Indira canteens. These could potentially double as cooling spaces. They open and they serve food during certain hours, but then they can double as cooling spaces. So this kind of reuse would make solutions maybe more scalable, and it's also faster in the way we look at solutioning. The other thing that's often missed in this conversation on heat solutions is the equity dimensions, which I kind of alluded to earlier on as well. Not everyone can access air conditioning or even a well ventilated housing. So there are a lot of informal settlements in particular, which are becoming extreme heat traps. In fact, a few years back, I remember writing an article, while we are happily putting up ACs, basically you're just keeping the heat out. People residing around are actually facing the brunt of that heat, which is kind of increasing also because of these multiple ACs that we put up. So, which is where I think interventions like probably cool roofs, better ventilation, shaded streets in low income neighborhoods become very, very critical. And they have the potential to deliver some of the highest impact per rupee that could be spent on these kind of solutions. The other aspect, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, is the energy planning space. While typically, as temperature rise, we know that the demand for cooling spikes. It does put an enormous strain on the power systems. Now, without upgrades, this could lead to outages right when cooling is most needed. Can we really kind of get there? That's the question we need to be thinking about. And so, which is where I think a lot of the research is pointing very clearly towards need for smarter grids, more distributed renewable energy, and better demand forecasting so that we can stay resilient. Over and above all of this is the public health angle, which often gets ignored. So that needs to be embedded into infrastructure planning because while we do have heat action plans, I think they need to go beyond advisories. They need to include hospital preparedness, skilling of these health workers to actually recognize signs of a heat stress, which my interaction with public health professionals very clearly indicates that that's not really the case. People don't have that kind of training. And heat surveillance systems, targeted outreach for vulnerable groups and outdoor workers, elderly, children, and so on and so forth becomes very, very important. So urgency is very clear. Rising temperature and then humidity are intensifying heat stress. And also, I think this is straining power systems and energy systems, yes, but also the transport systems. I think in 2025, we really saw how disruptive this could be when the heat waves happened, which it affected everything from daily work to essential services. So ultimately, I think building heat resilience, it's not a standalone project. It's all about embedding it in everyday urban systems, which will make cities much cooler and safer and more equitable, so that we are better prepared for a much hotter future.
Right. Great. You touched upon, the issue and also explained some of the potential solutions. But I just want to take one step back.
Yeah.
Uh, can we now attribute heating clearly to climate science? Where is the attribution science? And if we can, what is the projection for the future? Is India going to become hotter and hotter? Or what is the trajectory? What is the science behind it? And after this, we'll come to policy and what's
Yeah.
happening in the policy space.
Right. The science with respect to warming is extremely clear. All the models and all the science that we work with, one of the things that's quite robust is temperature, understanding of temperature and its projections. While rainfall is quite tricky even today, while models have evolved a lot, but temperature and attribution to it. So with every degree rise, every whatever the CO2 rise, increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide, there are studies which very clearly indicate, how much is the increase in temperature. So the attribution and the science behind temperature increase and it being related to climate change is extremely clear, and there is hardly any uncertainty. While there could be questions on how much of the warming is going to be there, because it's while we talk about global projections, it's an average at the end of the day. You downscale it into regional projections. Again, it's an average that we are talking about. You downscale it still further into Indian context. We're still kind of talking about an average, but at the same time, what is very clear is the direction of change, which is a warmer future. So a warmer future is something that we are definitely kind of experiencing, and we are walking into. Now the question is, how warm is it going to get? Now projections very clearly say, even in India, the warming is going to be quite large. It could be anywhere between 1 degree or 1.5 degree to up to 3 or 3.5 degrees, irrespective of whichever region you're looking at. Our own studies have also, climate projections also indicate this very clearly, that there is going to be warming, and the number of extreme heat days are also projected to increase across India, for most of India, if not for every single place in India, every single district in India, for most of India, it's likely to increase. The added challenge is, while climate is just one element, I think land use change and then loss of biodiversity or green cover, and then urban infrastructure is also kind of exacerbating this problem. So while we might look at just temperature, we also need to kind of look at very localized changes that are happening, which are leading to these what we call as heat islands and so on and so forth, which we kind of keep talking about, we keep reading about, and so obviously, it is the reality that we have to live with.
Right, right. No, thanks. That gives a really good foundation from the scientific perspective. So now let's talk about policy.
Mhm.
And in India, I think while we can talk national policies which provide nice frameworks, but the action is all in states. So
Mm.
and you do a lot of work with different state governments and state
Yeah.
agencies. So uh, I'm I'm curious to understand, like, how are states responding to the heating
Right.
challenge, and what are their approaches to handling it? And I'm sure some states have done more than others, and if you can kind of provide some trends on what's going on in the states.
Right, right. Yes, you're right. But I think the fundamental thing that's driving this is, I think in 2016, the National Disaster Management Authority basically set the groundwork for managing heat waves through national guidelines, which led to the spread of what we hear as heat action plans across the country. Now, a well-known example is the Ahmedabad, heat action plan. That was one of the earliest plans that happened, and it showed how early warnings, coordination between agencies, community outreach can actually reduce health-related risks. Now, today, I think over 200 or 250 cities and districts across uh, 23 and odd heat-prone states have operational plans in place. And in many regions, like you rightly said, particularly in states like Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Central India, uh, it's interesting. We spoke about it earlier also. People have long adapted to heat. And they are avoiding outdoor work during peak hours. For instance, in Odisha, uh, they've shifted the work and school timings away from the hottest parts of the day, and it's mandated in a state like Odisha. But heat is becoming much more intense and widespread. Maybe these traditional coping strategies may not be just enough, especially for workers who can't avoid exposure, which is where the equity angle kind of kicks in. But what is of course promising is that some of the very promising responses to heat are local. There are city and district level plans, more and more, that are kind of coming in, and they are moving beyond emergency response to prevention. Cool roofs is one such example. So is more green cover, better access to water, that these cities or these district plans are talking about and trying to create as well. And we also have the non-state actors who are stepping in here. So it's not just the government. For example, so we work with the Seva Foundation, which is the Self-Employed Women's Association, and Vimo Seva. They've developed a climate insurance. It's a parametric insurance that they've developed tailored for informal workers to help protect their livelihoods from heat stress. So there are a lot of these innovative things. One is the government itself doing it, but then you also have these non-state actors who are also trying to do this. But however, in all this work, there's still a gap, which is the data and heat risk mapping that needs to be in place. Many of these city heat action plans actually rely on citywide temperature data. But heat exposure can vary dramatically within neighborhoods because of the way the neighborhoods are. Without the hyperlocal data, like, for example, ward level heat mapping or real time monitoring, that's very important. It's hard to target interventions where they are needed the most. Especially in informal settlements. Now, within Bangalore, we have the City Climate Action Plan, which you also have a cell with a special commissioner who is housed there. So there is a lot of discussion, and all the different think tanks and organizations working in Bangalore are, kind of coordinatedly working to kind of look at that. So within CSTEP, building and energy is one aspect that we are kind of leading, and we are looking at it from a heat perspective. So we have one ward that we are working with, where we've tried to kind of use all the data that could be brought in at that hyperlocal level, and then try to kind of inform planning process and even budgets that could be allocated for these aspects. Now, this needs to happen across India, which is the only way we could look at possibly trying to actually come up with implementable action oriented plans rather than plans per se, which is on paper. And of course, accountability and implementation needs more focus here. Like I said, there are lots of plans, but execution is quite uneven across states, districts, as well as cities. The problem here is lack of clear budgets, defined responsibilities. Basically, the institutional mechanisms are quite confusing. And obviously, regular evaluation is completely missing in these places. And a lot of this is, while the responsibility is housed with one agency, I think a lot of the line departments need to start working together, whether it is the water resources, whether it is energy planning, whether it is, the climate cells that could be there in these different places. I think all of them need to kind of come together and work in a coordinated fashion so that it actually translates into on-ground action. So which is why, the real challenge now to me isn't planning for heat. It's more about implementing, targeting, and scaling what we already know works before we think about new innovative solutions potentially, that needs to be there. And this is really important because tackling heat requires all hands on the deck, and across governments, communities, and institutions. And that's because, it's not an occasional crisis anymore. It's growing and it's becoming an everyday challenge.
Right, right. You touched upon something that I was actually curious about, which is kind of budgets. I mean,
Mhm.
to implement some of these projects or even implement some of the pathways of the plans, you need money. And
Yeah.
this is not just a heat, generally adaptation lacks
Right.
finance. So are you seeing in your work any innovative models to make some of these projects, bankable?
Mm,
Like mitigate for mitigation, there is, at least in the renewable energy space, this kind of, people now say like you can actually make money.
right.
So investors and others can come in. But in the adaptation, specifically on the heat space, are there ways for, large financial institutions to make money, or are we going to be perpetually dependent on state budgets and state capacity? Is there a business case? That's kind of my question.
Right. I think to begin with, I think let's look at the money available within the government itself. I think one of the fundamental things is, heat is not recognized as a disaster across all the states. While there are certain states which have gone ahead and kind of declared it as a disaster, but I think it needs to kind of actually become fundamental. That becomes really important because it will be able to kind of unlock a lot of funds that are there with the states to begin with. Right now heat is underfunded compared to cyclones and floods. We all know that. And if it's included, states can use funds like the State Disaster Response Fund. So that is the first step for both cooling and heat mitigation. Things like, shelters, water access, urban cooling, all of this could be done using that. And we're already seeing that, heat waves do trigger massive power outages, right? It is costing industries billions and hitting vulnerable communities the hardest. I do not know of any examples where, industries could kind of also kind of take that on. Could CSR play a role in this? I don't really have an answer because it's also impacting them and their operations. Is there a way for them to kind of divert some of the money in the planning process itself, at least pick up certain regions where they could potentially work with to kind of recognize heat as a disaster and actually kind of support some of the work or solutioning that could potentially be done. The other thing is also unlocking insurance coverage. I think this is something, I think parametric insurance around heat is something where there is quite some experimentation going on, and people are trying to kind of see how potentially these financial products could inform and work well in this particular space. But other than that, I think people are kind of investing in some places in localized sensors, temperature sensors, and then tying it to kind of a data dashboard and then see how they can potentially produce financially viable products. I personally don't have much idea about if there is something really groundbreaking that's happened up till now, but I'm hoping that something would happen so that it kind of doesn't rely completely on state solutions and state funding ultimately.
Great. So now I want to ask something about energy policy and cooling. So,
Mm.
cooling demand is rising. So how, and you touched a little bit about this, but maybe we could double click a little bit on that.
Yeah.
How can
Yeah.
heat considerations be more meaningfully integrated as part of energy policy and energy planning? Especially
Right.
now, we also need to tame the emissions. So there's
Right.
the dual challenge. So how
Absolutely.
can this
Absolutely.
be
Yes.
integrated?
So interestingly, in my team, we recently did, not very recently, I think late last year. So, we did a convening where we were looking at the entire life cycle of buildings, where we had people from these different spaces coming together, right from people working with alternate materials to people working, in the policy space to, large builders to, a whole bunch of people coming together. And everybody was talking about there are enough solutions in this space, but what's really not working well is one, they're not able to scale it, primarily a because of the cost. That seems to be a problem. The other aspect people are also talking about is some of these materials are very locally available. Now how do you kind of, if you kind of look at it as a solution for buildings, it might work. But if you look at the transportation and emissions. You brought in the mitigation angle, right? So obviously, if it's available somewhere which is very far, it might be available in abundance. But then if you end up transporting it several thousands of kilometers, you're adding to the emissions. So I think one needs to start looking at systems as a whole. To the question on, how can heat considerations be more meaningful, and how could they be integrated into energy policy? I think one of the fundamental answers, which, I mean, this is nothing new, everybody talks about it, is better design buildings. So I think passive design strategies, which ensure ventilation, reduce the heat gain, and also kind of, cool roofs, etc. Like the building codes that I spoke about, where, they do have aspects of this. But I think what's kind of lacking is it's an implementation challenge. So I think we really need to kind of see how all construction can follow these best practices. Is there a way to mandate some of this? Is there a way to kind of make it, beneficial? I think cost is a factor, but I think people are quite, uh, uh, it's a very, the focus, or, when you're looking at it, we are very short term in our visions. We just look at today, okay, what's going to cost me? So I think there need to be more and more, there is enough work, but I think we need to be able to find better ways of positioning and putting out stuff which talks about the medium term gains of switching to some of these. And one of the other thing that is also kind of a roadblock to this happening is also the fact that all of us are pretty hesitant to try with anything new unless somebody has actually used it. You don't want to be the first person now, which is where I think it really becomes important to kind of try and see if public buildings, if public construction can start incorporating some of these. If that become the norm, then obviously, then the residential sector kind of, slowly kind of kicks in. While a lot of the public infrastructure are still kind of doing the traditional constructions, there is a need to kind of start thinking about thermal comfort when you're constructing these buildings. In some work related to what I'm talking about. So again, within my team, we based on some work we did for Karnataka, on all sectors, we created something called Namma Safari, which is low carbon development pathways for Karnataka, and of course, buildings is one of the sectors. So what we've done is with the Rajiv Gandhi RGHCL and Karnik, which is the district level construction that happens. So we've kind of partnered with them and some other organizations which work in the building space to try and see, if the construction, for example, the Maiwan technology that's being used largely, is it really suited for a place like Bangalore? That's a question. I mean, it's blindly being put out. So that's an assessment that we are trying to do with another partnering with another organization, and we're also trying to work with the district level authorities. That's the Karnik, where we are also trying to see how do we influence the building infrastructure there. To try and see how do we make it low carbon, but at the same time ensure that the thermal comfort is something that's integrated into that, and of course, ultimately, that kind of looks at you're not increasing the emissions. You are trying to be low carbon. At the same time, you're also looking at the comfort aspect, which becomes essential and which becomes extremely important in a warming world.
Right, right. Yeah, now let's talk about the future. We talked a lot about the past and what's happening and, the science, the policy of it. What are some, institutional or policy shifts that India needs to take, whether it's the national level or state level or even very local level, that will help improve India's preparedness for extreme heat? Like based on
Right.
your work, what are your some like top
Yeah.
shifts that need to happen?
Just to reiterate what I said, one, recognizing it as a disaster across India becomes the first step, which will unlock some of the funding that we spoke about early on. The other important aspect is I think to kind of look at hyperlocal ways of solutioning, a very accurate, very robust vulnerability mapping and targeted support for those most at risk becomes very important. To kind of, aid some of this, we have an ongoing project in my team where we are creating something called a national heat risk dashboard. Now, it is for all the districts of India. And what we're also trying to do is we're not working only with air-based parameters, which is typically the kind of temperatures that we talk about. We're also looking at surface-based indices that we are wanting to do, and we are combining these. So one is trying to look at thermal comfort of humans. The other is about infrastructure itself. How much is the system heating? What do you need to do? And combining the two to understand what's really happening. So what this is helping us to kind of understand is the causality factors, whether it is land use change, whether it is, loss of green cover, whether it is unchecked development that's actually causing it, which can kind of help inform some of the use cases that could potentially be there. Now, while this is essentially a visualization dashboard, what we are also envisaging in this work is that, we are also going to be working with specific cities and trying to downscale this work using, again, hyperlocal sensors, working with other people who, other partners who are embedded within the system, and also train the cities to kind of see how do they monitor and integrate it into their planning process. These are two levels of work that we are trying to do. The other thing which can also kind of aid and which is very important when you're planning for heat is that the blue-green spaces that you could leverage. So on this aspect for Bangalore City, we are doing some extremely granular work where we're looking at 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer and mapping all the blue-green spaces. We also kind of backing it with surveys that we are doing across Bangalore to understand and also map all the different assets, which include the biodiversity as well. So what we are combining is climate hazard mapping at a very granular scale, a vulnerability mapping where you're trying to understand who is housed where and what are they surrounded by. So which is what would determine what the kind of solutioning potentially could be. And then coming up with a set of solutions and also trying to see, not just put solutions, but also come up with some kind of a cost benefit analysis, which potentially will inform people that if you need to do this in this particular space, this is what it's going to cost you. And the way we are looking at it is, one, trying to kind of work with state agencies or city planners, but also kind of work with, say, maybe apartment complexes. I mean, some of these housing societies have very large, apartment unions or whatever they call. And they are taking a lot of decisions. They are influencing a lot of work that's happening in their wards. So we are trying to kind of see, how do we kind of use this hyperlocal data to inform planning. So I think data is the missing piece in a lot of the things. It's easy to say that people need to do hyperlocal planning, but then who's going to provide the data, right? So I think that's where we are providing. We are trying to kind of come up with those kind of information which could inform planning. Secondly, I think while cities or states or districts develop these heat action plans, they need to be institutionalized at the local level. They are often ad hoc in many of these district plans, right? So ward level planning, clear accountability, locally defined temperature thresholds. Now, we are all sitting with IMDs, for plains, there is a certain threshold, for hills, there is a certain threshold. But what is becoming more and more evident is that it's not just the air temperature, the humidity has a large role to play as well. So can we think about heat indices which combine this? This is basically, in our phones, what we see, like, it feels like, right? So it's a combination of the temperature and the humidity, which is what is the feel like temperature, which is very important when you're thinking about, comfort. So I think we need to think of better indices that reflect these local realities and on-ground conditions. And in addition, I think two more shifts could make a big difference. One is uh, integrating heat into everyday urban governance. This today, it's still seasonal. Come March, there is a flurry of activity around heat. There's a lot of thinking that's happening. Cities and districts are, thinking about how do they kind of what kind of planning needs to happen, how do they spend on certain activities to kind of ensure what needs to be done. So I think embedding it into the land use planning, infrastructure decisions, and not just thinking of it as a seasonal issue becomes one other very important aspect of trying to make a difference as we move forward into a much hotter spaces. The other is linking, like I said, heat planning with energy and water systems. Because rising temperatures directly drive demand and stress, both of these, both energy as well as water systems. So I think ultimately what would make the difference is we need to move from scattered short-term responses to systemic funded, well-funded and localized plans and implementation actionable solutions which are built into cities or which are built into how cities are planned and managed on a day-to-day basis. I think that's the only way we will be able to kind of make India and the cities across India more prepared for extreme heat.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This was such a lovely conversation. I really appreciate your time, and I learned a lot. I was expecting that, and it was great. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sandeep. I enjoyed talking about heat primarily because, like I said right in the beginning, I grew up in a hot environment, but what I'm seeing is a much hotter environment, and we all acclimatize to cooler environments. But then suddenly I feel that this is not something that I signed up for. When you move into a city like Bangalore, you already you think, this is fantastic, all year round, great temperature. But it is what it is. We are facing that. And I think we
Right.
really need to make a difference and we really need to kind of see what we can do with that. Thanks for, having me on your podcast and really nice speaking to you about this.
Yeah, same here. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the India Energy Hour. Subscribe to this channel to never miss an update. To drop us a feedback, visit our website or write to us at theindiaenergyhour@gmail.com. We are on Twitter. You can follow at TIEH Podcast and get in touch with the two hosts at Shreya J and at Sandeep Pai.